Hello and welcome to another feature vignette. My name is Derek Welker, and today we're kind of going to be talking about Visualize and specifically rule of thirds. So a little while ago I did a presentation on the photographer's guide to Visualize. So I am a photographer in my spare time, and I want to take some specific principles that I see in the photography realm that don't necessarily get translated over into rendering, or at least from what I've seen in Visualize as of yet, is not as far as functionality goes, but more so use and how people are actually using the software. So I think I'm going to break this down into a 4-segment video. So we'll talk about rule of thirds today, and then we'll get into talking about some camera settings, the scene settings, and maybe some post-processing down the road, and how I like to use or apply these camera strategies to Visualize. So first, let's talk about rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds is not necessarily a photography principle. It started way back in the late 1700s in kind of art. So John Thomas Smith came out and said that basically when you have your subject right directly in the center and you break your picture or art into 2 equal segments, it kind of leaves it what he called awkwardly suspended and unable to determine which of those parts is to be considered as the subject. So then what he came out to say was that applying a ratio of 2/3 to 1/3 or 1 to 2, it just makes it more harmonizing, but he also said it's easier to determine your subject that way. So we break down the rule of thirds into kind of this segment, and it's all about your composition. So what that means is you're trying to place your subject on these horizontal or vertical lines or meet in those intersections. So let me show you a few examples of pictures that I have, and we'll kind of take a look at how rule of thirds plays in that. So this is a picture I took down in Florida, and if you take a look, it's kind of awkward, right? The subject is right directly in the center. We throw on that rule of thirds, it doesn't really follow that. Now if I remove that, move the picture over, it's a little bit more natural, right? We can see where that subject is and kind of see where she's going, right? We throw on that rule of thirds, that's what it looks like. Now because I had to crop everything for the PowerPoint to show that shifting, here's what this actual picture looks like, right? With that rule of thirds, pretty much perfect. Now let's take a look at rendering. Now that was a picture that I just showed that I took, but here's a rendering. Looks a little strange. We throw on that rule of thirds, doesn't necessarily look all that great. We move it over just a bit. That rule of thirds is good and everything looks wonderful. Same goes with this rendering. Doesn't look great. That rule of thirds doesn't look all that wonderful. We move it over just a little bit and it looks a lot better. We take a look at that rule of thirds, and the other thing that you will notice is that I did put those little K-cups in there on the intersection of another one. So it's not necessarily about your subject, but you can also place some props around there as well. Now, to turn on the rule of thirds, you hop over into Visualize, you go into your camera settings. In Advanced, you just click on Enable Grid Overlay for rule of thirds. That's how easy it is to show the rule of thirds, and then that's how you can move your camera around to make sure that your subject looks great. Now, last thing I want to point out is that don't always follow the rule of thirds, because if you have a picture that is perfectly symmetrical from one side to another, or you have a product that's perfectly symmetrical, don't try and put it off to one side because it looks a little bit strange. So that's what I've got for rule of thirds. I hope you enjoyed this and learned a little bit from this little feature vignette, as I want to call it. If you want to see more on this series, please let me know, and I can certainly bring in some more photography tips into the Visualize rendering world. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.